Emily, welcome to the Happiness Happens podcast. I'm so excited to have you here to have this conversation together today.
So happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
We are going to chat about so many amazing things. One of the first things, though, that I'm going to ask you, and it's a nice way that I like to open up this podcast because I like to get people's pulse check on this, but what does happiness mean to you?
Happiness is, I don't think it's like the elusive thing to strive for. I think it's something to appreciate. Like we wouldn't have happiness if we didn't have sadness, and we wouldn't have, pain if we didn't, we have to have opposite emotions. So I think just happiness to me is recognizing that we're whole people with lots of different emotions. And yeah, I don't know if that's an answer, but I feel like we're in a world that's like striving to be happy, and there's so many other things in the journey of getting to happiness that sometimes you miss if you're just looking for that feeling.
That's exactly it. And it's a really big reason why I started this podcast, to be honest with you, and like the intention behind the show, because I think that a lot of the times people can get so caught up in what is it supposed to look like? How am I supposed to live my life? How should I live my life? Like, is it according to the story that I have for myself, or is it according to the story that somebody else has created for me? And I mean, I think that's the perfect answer, because I agree with you. I don't think there's a destination to happiness. I think it's like those micro moments of joy and the inner peace that we feel from showing up for ourselves and choosing the right thing for us, and like getting out of toxic situations, which I'm sure we're going to talk about a little bit today.
Oh,
So
yes.
so let's start a little bit about, because this is a bit of a different topic than I've actually ever talked about on my show. I've never talked about sobriety to begin with, and I've also never talked about MLMs. So I want to know a little bit about how you got involved in this world, and like then the pivotal moment where you realize like, oh my God, this is not for me.
Yeah. So it seems like they're two very separate things, like sobriety and getting out of an MLM. But for me, they're really linked. And I think in a lot of ways, they're linked for a lot of people, because at the heart of it, it's looking for something outside of yourself for, again, that elusive happiness or filling some void that we feel like we're trying to fill, right? So for me, alcohol specifically was something that was problematic for me, that I was kind of trying to ignore. And so it was something for me that, again, I was trying to escape. I was trying to find happiness, joy. I thought it helped me connect with people more. I thought it helped me be a happier person, to be honest with you. And it really was the same thing with joining an MLM. Is I was a stay-at-home mom. I was, lonely. I was looking for something outside of just my mom duties. And this seemed like a very lucrative avenue, with someone I trusted. So I trusted her opinion, and it was really looking for that sense of community outside of myself. So I think that's the place they're really linked. And I think when I left both of those things, when I got sober and I left the MLM, I realized there were a lot of things I was ignoring, a lot of my intuition that I had been squashing. So they're two things that seem very different that, I had a very similar process with.
Okay, that is so golden. And I love that you are bridging the cross between both of them, because I think that alcohol itself, and like I am someone who in the past, I've always thought that I really enjoy drinking. I'm like, oh, it makes things so much more fun, or, it makes me more fun, exactly like you're saying. And so I kind of challenged myself at the beginning of, or at the end of February. I kind of said to myself, like, okay, I can't make decisions anymore out of clarity. I'm not showing up as my best self every single day. I'm just existing. You know what I mean? In a world where I know that I have the tools to be thriving because I've done so much work on myself, it's still like this one thing that can feel overwhelming. And I think when someone goes to, and maybe tell me your experience on this too, did you kind of at first, when you decided to go on that sobriety journey, did you have this feeling of like, I may not be fun anymore, or what do I do instead? Or even the word that I'm looking for is like I'm going to miss out on things, or, miss out on fun things. Does that make any sense?
Oh, yeah, for sure. The fear of missing out. I think that's what
Mm,
keeps a lot of people doing a lot of things that maybe don't serve them. And, I'm not an anti drinking person. Like my
yeah.
own husband drinks, a lot of my friends drink. So that's not the angle I have at all. It's looking at why we're using a substance. And for me personally, it was looking for, again, something outside of myself, looking for that feeling, looking for, oh, this makes me fun, this makes me happy. And then critically thinking about, actually, does it? Like, does it make me happy when I wake up hungover?
Yeah.
Like, does it make me happy when I like don't know what I texted the night before? And asking like, what do I need when I'm saying like, oh God, I really need a drink? What actually do I need? Do I need a break? Do I need to go lie down? Do I need to eat something? And so just looking critically at like, how is this fitting into my life? And for sure there's this thought of, if you're using it for quote unquote fun, then if you remove it, you're like, well, I'm not going to have fun.
Mm,
So that's definitely a thing that came in my head. And for me, it got to the point where the negative consequences outweighed anything that I could possibly miss out on. And
yeah.
so it had to get to the point where it didn't matter. Like the
Yeah.
benefits of quitting outweighed the benefits of continuing to drink.
Okay, I actually love this so much because as you were saying this, I'm thinking to myself, even just recently. So for me, it's been about a month and a half and I haven't had any drinks. And I'm like, wow, like I can actually make decisions way more clear and way more confidently. And I'm also not an anti drinker. Like I can appreciate an amazing bottle of wine. Okay. Like I like enjoying, like we live in wine country out here in Canada and I like going to the wineries. Like those are all things that I, really enjoy. But for me, it's always been that point of like no return. You know what I mean? It's like when I can't stop myself when I start, And
Mm-hmm.
very candidly, I've never actually said that out loud before to a public audience, but here we are. But so I went out for dinner with family once and then I went out for dinner with friends and like another night, and both of those nights I was like, wow, I have had so much more fun in this moment than I would have had if I drank 3 or 4 glasses of wine. And like I remembered it and I was more
Mm-hmm.
present, and I didn't allow feelings of like, you know, any kind of like feelings of like not enoughness or anger or frustration or whatever to like bubble up while I was drinking. Like I was very clear headed. I was like, this is a really nice way to live. Like I really like this.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, just the mindfulness of it, right?
mhm,
Yeah. Yeah,
mhm,
and I think that's so much more where the conversation should go just in society. And I think it's getting there. I think it's becoming more of a wellness conversation
yeah,
because, I think there's this thought to blame ourselves like, oh gosh, once I have one, I can't stop. And the reality is, it's like, that's what the substance is made to do. It's made to, raise your dopamine levels and make you want more. And so that's not like a human problem or a fault. We would never fault someone for smoking a cigarette and then wanting another one,
right,
right? Like, oh, you can't just stop at one. What's wrong with you?
right,
So I think the conversation is changing about, alcohol just, it is what it is. It's legal if you want to use it,
hmm
but it is an addictive substance. And so having that informed consent and viewing it that, it is a drug and, you gotta be careful. You gotta be mindful. And I think that's the
exactly.
most important thing.
I love that so much. So I want to talk about this relationship between the MLM side and then the alcohol side. And one thing that I was thinking about when I was looking into your journey and your book that I want to touch on, I want to make sure we talk about that today, is this piece of belonging. You know what I mean? Like we all want to belong to something bigger than, especially you were saying before you were stay at home mom, and maybe you feel like, okay, but who am I? What am I doing?
Mhm.
Like, where do I belong? And I think that a lot of people question this feeling of, I don't know where I fit in this world. And so I'm just going to do this next thing and maybe I'll feel like I belong. Can you speak to that feeling of why, why we feel like we need to belong so deeply? And then how that felt sort of fulfilled for you when you were in both spaces?
Yeah. So I think the first thing is obviously the world, especially America. I mean, probably have it a little better in Canada, but
I don't know.
women just are not valued
Oh, yeah.
societally,
Yeah.
right? Like we don't have paid childcare or,
Mat
maternity
leave. Yeah.
leave most places. We don't have a lot of programs to help women. All the mental load falls on mothers. I mean, our entire society is held up by women's unpaid labor. It really is. And so you could start there and start by saying, well, what choices do we have? It's a heck of a lot easier to open a bottle of wine at 5 o'clock than to change all the systemic stuff, right?
Totally.
And I think that no matter what you do, if you're a woman who decides she doesn't want to have kids or can't have kids for whatever reason, or you decide to stay home or you decide to work, no matter what, there will be someone who's telling you that you are doing something wrong, no matter what. You know, you're not being the best mom, the best employee, the best whatever you can be. And so there's this internal struggle of, okay, I decided to stay home with my kids because it made the most financial sense or whatever. But gosh, I went to college. I had this career that I really did like, and I would love to get back to that, but I can't.
Right.
So it's like you're torn between these worlds of, okay, I wanted to do this, yes, but I also want to do this, and I'm not allowed to do both. Right. So that sense of like, I want to belong to something outside of this. I want to be with coworkers and go to happy hour after work, or I want to go out and not have to make excuses for it. Like if this is for work, right? So that's what it was for me. I felt like there was no way I could go back into the workforce because of childcare costs and my husband's schedule. And so this to me was like, oh wow, you can do this in your spare time, your vast spare time around your kids, still stay at home, never miss a moment, all of those platitudes.
Right.
Oh, and you can go meet friends out for wine and sell these products. So to me, it was like, oh, I get a community and money, and I still get to be a stay-at-home mom. It's like the best of both worlds. It sounds like it anyway.
Right. Until you get like really sucked into it and you're like thousands of dollars deep and you're like, why am I not selling the stuff that they all told me that I would sell? I've done them too in the past. And, you know, and it's interesting though, too. Like for me, it was more of like, I always wanted to make sure that whatever the product was felt like in integrity with me as a human being. Like if I'm not going to use it myself, then I'm not going to sell it. You know what I mean? But how did you make that shift? Like, what was the moment for you when you were like, okay, I don't want to do this anymore and I need to do something different?
Yeah, so it was really getting sober was what opened my eyes because again, I had joined when I was actively drinking and drinking a lot. And so I was
Right.
already using this substance to kind of dull my intuition and my, my inhibitions, I guess, so that I could talk to people about something that maybe I felt a little unsure about, or I didn't, I didn't necessarily like cold messaging people, but it was sure a lot easier after a glass of champagne.
Totally. You're
So
like,
when
look
I
how
stopped
friendly I am.
drinking, yeah. So when I stopped drinking, all of a sudden it was, oh gosh, these things don't feel good. And they probably never felt good. So I couldn't do those things anymore. But at the same time, I was still earning money. And,
Yeah.
You kind of, I think in society, we think money equates success, right? In so many instances, like, oh, you get a scholarship for doing well in school and it's money, and you get a good salary for getting a good job. And so I think we have this bias that, oh, but I'm making money doing this. How could it be bad?
Right.
So for me, it took a while of like, okay, I need to tap into like my critical thinking and really find those thoughts that are mine and not just what I've been told this whole time. So it took a while to crawl out of like not only getting my intuition back, but questioning all the things I had been told over the years about what I was doing and this dream that I was selling that was coming true for me, but it was not coming true for other people.
Right. Right. Oh my gosh, that is such a big piece, and I think the intuition piece is so key when it comes to the journey that we go on as human beings. And I think that we all have it. I think if you look at children, for example, like children are so intuitive. You know what I mean? Like they're little conduits for all of the light and all of the good, and they're amazing. And it's all of the extra stuff that gets programmed into our world of who and how you should be and what you should and shouldn't do. And as you grow up, you start to take on all of these stories. Like maybe your parents are super proud of you because you're really good at sports. And, now you feel like, okay, I should go and get a scholarship, but I don't really want that. And so all of those little moments, and like, you have to, whatever, at the end of the day, it kind of is what it is. But like, you have to, eventually I think what happens is people have this like awareness as they get older. They're like, wow, like, I'm sure I wanted that in some capacity, but did I really want it to like that full extent. And so when you came out of this group, because obviously you'd built a really amazing community around you, and I'm sure it was really fun while you were in it. Like, I'm sure, you know, some of the things were fun, like getting together with the girls and like getting, you know, doing all of the things. How did you start to find community when you felt like maybe you didn't belong in that community anymore?
Yeah. So it's really interesting because, you know, like any bad thing, it's never all bad,
Right.
right? Like I can even say that about drinking. Like I had some really great times drinking. Overall, it didn't serve me. It wasn't good for me, right?
Yeah.
And same thing in the MLM. Like I had great experiences. I met great people, but overall, it was very damaging and destructive to others. And I felt like I was, you know, there was a lot of coercive control and I felt like I was manipulating people. So, like,
Yeah.
overall, it wasn't good. Right.
Yeah.
And so, I think that's one thing that keeps us stuck longer than we should in doing things we don't necessarily deeply want to be doing because it's not all bad.
Yeah.
And for me, I slowly stepped away. And the more I stepped away, the more some of the peripheral friendships kind of fell away too. You sort
Yeah.
of realize who your deep friendships are. And the same thing happened when I quit drinking too. I realized the people I was gravitating towards because they like to party the way I party
Yeah,
versus
exactly.
people who I could actually have a deep conversation with. So it slowly, you know, my circle got a lot smaller. And when I did leave, you know, it was kind of jarring how many people just quit talking to me in the
Totally.
organization. Luckily, I did have a local network, and this was all during the pandemic where
Oh,
we were connecting over Zoom. And thankfully, with sobriety, you know, I have built a community of sober people. I had built a
good.
community of sober people online. So I had that, I wouldn't even say to fall back on because I was already in it.
Yeah.
But if I didn't, you know, I think that's one thing that keeps people stuck in MLMs and other high control groups is, you know, I'm not making money. You know, it's negative for these reasons. But if I leave, I'm not going to have any friends.
Yeah.
And that's really hard.
That's very lonely, you know? I think when you make a
Mm-hmm.
big shift like that in your life, because those are two like big pillars of who you were at that time. You know what I mean? Like it gets very wrapped up into your identity of who you are as a human being. And, you know, how, okay, so I just wanted to understand like this little piece here. How did you feel supported? Like, did you decide to go on the sobriety journey and like pull yourself out of the MLM industry first, or did you decide to like find a community that could support you and then leave? You know what I mean? Like, how did you do this in a way that didn't make you feel incredibly lonely and isolated? Or unless maybe it did.
Yeah. Yeah. So when I got sober, I was still very much in the MLM.
Okay.
And so I found a sobriety community while I was still immersed in this MLM.
Mm.
And kind of ironically is the MLM sort of saw this story of me getting sober as like this really aspirational thing. And so I was actually like speaking and using it, like
Wow.
using the story as like, oh, look at what our consultants can do. She was an alcoholic and now she's sober and look at her and look at her business. So for a while it kept me stuck even more because I
Right.
felt like, oh gosh, this really unlocked my potential, even though I had all these questions now of, ooh, this feels icky, this feels icky. But again, I'm making money and people are congratulating me. So it's a really hard place to be. So by the time, you know, it took a couple years after I got sober for me to be like, okay, this is not something I can be involved in anymore.
Yeah.
And I had luckily, you know, I'd built another community of, you know, my sober people by then, and some people who were still and still are in the MLM who are, you know, great people. And, you know, they didn't view friendship with me as like a last straw for if I quit, you know, it
Totally.
was, but, but for the most part, me leaving was, I think, hard for people to stay involved in something. It would force them to look at what maybe they're doing that they don't feel good about
Mm-hmm.
by acknowledging that I'm
Yes.
leaving for those reasons, right?
Yes. It's like that
Yeah.
permission slip that you know in the back of your mind, like,
Mm.
maybe I don't actually love this so much, but I'm having so much quote unquote fun. You know what I mean? Like, it's so fun. And
Yeah.
again, sometimes you need people in your life to do something different, to take a different path to show you that you also are allowed to question things and figure out what you actually really want out of your life and not put your self-worth into a place of belonging and instead that place of
Yeah.
empowerment, which is a massive journey to go on.
Yeah. I think it holds up a mirror to other people, no matter what you
Mm-hmm.
do, right? It good or bad. Just when I got sober, I think it was hard for some people at first to think, oh gosh, if she doesn't drink anymore, what must she think about my drinking? Or if
Mm,
she left the MLM, what must she think about my involvement? And it forces people to look at themselves in places they maybe don't want to. So for me, a big part of that was, knowing where I ended and other people began. That's
mm,
their journey, not mine. That's for them to deal with, not
totally.
me. And know that it's not about me.
Totally.
Yeah.
I love that. Okay, this has been absolutely incredible. I want to talk a little bit about your book really quick. And could you tell us what inspired you to write it? Because I understand it's your second book that you've written. And so, what inspired you to write it? Why now? And yeah, let's start with that.
So, yeah, I wrote a recovery memoir in 2019. And really, that was just once I got sober and I started writing and reading memoirs was a huge part of my recovery. And writing was very cathartic for me. And I have always loved to write. And so I thought, gosh, this would be such a, almost a thank you to the world for all of these recovery memoirs I've read. And now here's my story out there. So it was more just getting my story out there, getting aligned as one person. And there's so much freedom in like when your secrets are out there, like there's
Mm,
nothing anyone can hold against you. There's no shame, right? So that was huge for me. And from writing the book, I realized, gosh, I really love writing. And so I continued writing and, I would write articles. And at this time I was starting to deconstruct out of the MLM.
mm,
And I started realizing how I'd been complicit in, hurting a lot of people by being involved in this. And so for me, it was kind of like the best apology is change behavior and talking about it, because I could have just left and said, okay, I don't like this. I'm not involved anymore. But then I thought, I have a responsibility to talk about this and talk about, again, informed consent. Like, this is what you maybe saw was me in these sparkly gowns and driving this shiny car and supposedly making all this money. But this is what really happened. And this is how all these things came about. And this is what's really behind all of that. So I
mm.
felt like a responsibility after talking so loudly about the MLM for so many years and throwing my weight behind it and giving my endorsement, that I needed to come clean on the other side in just as big of a way.
Totally. That is so incredible. I love that. And when you started on this entire journey of like completely changing your life, and as you were writing your book, I'm sure you probably had all kinds of feelings coming up, because it's kind of like when you're writing a book, you have to reprocess all of the things that you've been through, which might not be easy for people to revisit, What did part of that healing journey look like for you in repairing some of those broken relationships and, having to apologize? Like, it's not easy for people, right? There's so much shame and there's so much guilt.
Yeah. Yeah. I think for me, having gone through the recovery process and sobriety journey and being at those really low points where you have to acknowledge your own part in things
Mm,
and apologize where you can. And there's going to be some places where you can't. There are going to be people who always are going to see you as the villain, and
yeah,
learning how to be okay with that. Right.
yeah.
So I think I had had a lot of practice by that point. And so when I left the MLM, acknowledging, you know what, it's okay to think you're doing a really good thing. Like I fully believed I was doing something really good, even when I wasn't. Like,
Yeah.
even when this was hurting people and I was selling a dream that didn't exist, I thought I was doing something really helpful. And when I realized I wasn't, that's when it was important what I did next, right? That I
Mm,
quit and that I talked about it. Because again, I could have just not said anything. I could have just continued collecting a check. But I think, if you're doing the best with the information you have, that's the best you can do, is just the next right thing.
that's beautiful. I love that. I'm going to ask you one more question, and it's one that I ask all of my guests when they come on the show. I've been asking it for years, and I always get a different answer. But it is, what could someone do, our listener do today, one thing to create a little more happiness in their day, every day, starting today?
I think gratitude is
Mm,
I'm sure this is something you hear a lot. And like, I do think it gets thrown around a lot because it's really easy to be like, oh, I'm so grateful for my husband or whatever.
Yeah.
But going into like little details, like being detailed about just a few things every day, like, gosh, I'm really grateful for the sun shining this morning because that means spring is coming. Or
Right.
I'm really grateful for like my hot cup of coffee that tastes really good this morning or whatever. Like it can be very small, but it's amazing how when you notice little things, that you notice more little things. You
Yeah.
just gravitate toward noticing things that are good, and not in a toxically positive way,
No.
but in a way that just makes you appreciate that everything that's around you. So long
Amazing.
answer, gratitude.
No, I love that. I love that because you're right. Gratitude can get tossed around a little bit and we can kind of forget the intention behind gratitude, but you're exactly right. And it is absolutely those like little intentional moments of gratitude for the little things that, you know, you can be grateful for the big things too, but when you can find that gratitude in the little things, it helps you appreciate things on such a broader scale. Emily, where can our listeners find you and how can they order your book? We're going to have the links in the show notes, but in case they want to go directly and not check the notes.
Yeah, so you can pre-order it literally anywhere you buy your books, online or in person. Any bookstore can get it for you. It's pre-order. It'll come out on May 30th. And I'm on every platform on Emily Lynn Paulson. And then I have a group for sober moms called Sober Mom Squad that you can find on all platforms. And it's on Sober Mom Squad.
That's beautiful. I love that. Thank you so much for sharing this time with myself and my listeners today. I'm so grateful for you. And I'm just, this was such a lovely conversation about hearing your story and the magic that you're creating with your new book that's coming soon. So
Thanks so much.
thank you. Thanks so much, everyone, for tuning in to this week's episode of the podcast. Remember that happiness happens when you're least expecting it. And I hope you have a beautiful day. Thanks.